Can you even imagine this? For the very first time in U.S. history, a president is put on trial by his own government. That's right, today we are jumping headfirst into that incredible constitutional showdown, the impeachment of Andrew Johnson. Yep, you heard that right. I mean, think about it. The Civil War had just ended a few years before, and suddenly the nation is thrown into another massive crisis. This one, though, was testing the very limits of the Constitution itself. And really, this whole crisis boiled down to a question that, we're still grappling with today. What are the real limits of presidential power? How much is too much? And maybe more importantly, who actually gets to decide that? So, to get how things got this heated, we've got to rewind a bit. We're talking about the period right after the Civil War, which we call Reconstruction. And let me tell you, this was a time of serious, deep division over the huge question of how to put a shattered country back together. Okay, so you basically had two totally different roadmaps for America's future. On one side, you have President Andrew Johnson. He's the guy who took over after Lincoln was assassinated. His plan? Let's get the southern states back into the Union quick and easy. But on the other side, you had Congress, led by a pretty intense group called the Radical Republicans. They were saying, not so fast. They wanted strong federal control to make sure the civil rights of newly freed African Americans were actually protected. And look, these weren't just minor disagreements. We're talking about a fundamental battle for the soul of the nation. And this conflict, well, it escalated into all-out political war, and fast. You can see the pattern play out right here. Congress passes something huge like the Civil Rights Act. Johnson immediately hits it with a veto. But then, and this is key, Congress fires right back, getting enough votes to override his veto. This happened over and over again. It created this incredibly toxic stalemate between the president and Congress. Okay, so the tension gets so thick, you could cut it with a knife. And that's when Congress decides, all right, let's set a trap. They literally craft a piece of legislation designed to do one thing: bait President Johnson into a fight that we're pretty sure he was going to lose. So what was this trap? It was a law called the Tenure of Office Act. Now, I know that sounds super boring and bureaucratic, but trust me, its purpose was anything but. What it really did was tell the president, point blank, you are not allowed to fire key people in your own cabinet unless we in the Senate say it's okay. And this law wasn't about just any government official. No, it was laser-focused on one guy, the Secretary of War, Edmund Stanton. See, Stanton was a holdover from Lincoln's time, and he was secretly working with Congress on their Reconstruction plans. So by protecting Stanton's job, Congress could stop Johnson from using the military to mess with their policies in the South. It was a really clever and, a really aggressive political chess move. And Johnson, well, he saw this law for exactly what it was. To him, this was a direct attack on his power as president. He was absolutely convinced it was unconstitutional, and there was no way he was just going to sit back and let it happen. And that defiance, that's what triggers the main event, the moment of truth. We're talking about the impeachment, the trial, and a final verdict that would come down to one single vote. So Johnson calls their bluff. He fires Secretary Stanton. He intentionally, deliberately breaks the Tenure of Office Act. It was like he was daring Congress. What are you going to do about it? Well, they did something. The House of Representatives moved fast. I mean, really fast. They approved a staggering 11 articles of impeachment against the president. The official charge was high crimes and misdemeanors, but the heart of their case, really, was him breaking that one specific law. So what happens next? The whole thing moves over to the Senate for a trial, where the senators basically act as the jury. And the stakes? They could not have been higher. See, to actually remove a president from office, you need a 2/3 vote. That's a super majority, and it is an incredibly high bar to clear. The framers of the Constitution did that on purpose, to make sure impeachment wouldn't just become another political tool to get rid of a president you don't like. You can just imagine the tension in that room as they started counting the votes, everyone holding their breath. The math itself was pretty simple, but the weight of that number was just immense. The magic number they needed for a conviction was 36. That's it. 36 guilty votes, and the President of the United States would be removed from office. And then the final count comes in. 35. 35 votes to convict. They were one vote short. Just one. So, by the slimmest possible margin, Andrew Johnson gets to keep his job. he's acquitted. But let's be clear, this wasn't really a win for him. The trial completely shattered his political power. For the rest of his term, he was pretty much a president in name only. Okay, so why are we talking about this story that's over 150 years old? Why does it still matter? Because what happened in that trial set a huge, lasting precedent for how the balance of power works in the US government. You can really boil it down to three big things. First, it sent a crystal clear message. Nobody, not even the president, is above the law. Second, it cemented Congress's role as a major check on the president's power. And third, it helped define what impeachment is really for. It's not for when you just disagree with a president's policies, it's a constitutional tool for when a president genuinely abuses their power. When you look at the whole picture, this entire ordeal was like a massive stress test for the Constitution. And what it proved, what it reaffirmed, is that the whole American system is built on this idea of checks and balances. No one person and no one branch of government gets to have all the power. And that really brings us full circle, right back to that big question we started with. Because this whole fight, it wasn't just about Andrew Johnson. It wasn't even just about Reconstruction. It was about that fundamental push and pull between the different branches of government. And that tension, it is absolutely still shaping and defining the limits of power in America right now, today.